Good evening, folks. This is Brian Lawrence with IndianPeaksWeather.net, your first source of weather for Nederland, Colorado. Good evening. It's currently 32 degrees here at my weather station. We're located about 4.5 miles east of downtown Nederland. You can see that the winds are currently calm, but generally from the south to southwest. We've had a few gusts as high as 4 miles per hour. Dew point right now 7 degrees, resulting in a humidity of 34%, and the pressure is 29.63 inches. Our high temperature today, 49 degrees, and our low 31 so far. And that gives us an average of 40 degrees, and that's about 5 or 6 degrees above normal for us. It was a beautiful weekend. Saturday and Sunday both sported temperatures in the upper 40s to low 50s here in the Rocky foothills. Much warmer down in the plains in Boulder, over to Longmont, Fort Collins. Temperature is generally in the mid to upper 60s. I think there were a few readings as high as 70 degrees, a little bit further out in the plains. So another beautiful weekend here. And folks, yeah, it is mid-November, and we're about to be reminded that it's mid-November here in the next couple of days. Before we get to that, let's take a look at the big picture. Current temperatures right now from the Weather Underground Network. And you can see temperatures generally in the mid 30s to low 40s. This is interesting here. You notice there's a few readings right below the Front Range foothills in the mid to upper 40s. I think you're seeing a little bit of mixing due to the winds there. Out in the plains, though, where the winds are lighter, the atmosphere is able to cool off a little bit quicker, and temperatures are already back in the mid 30s. Very similar to what we're seeing up here in the foothills. Here's Nederland, 35 degrees. Here's my station, 32. And some cooler readings up towards Eldora, about 1,000 feet higher than us, 25. And then back on the west side of the divide, over towards Fraser and Winter Park, temperatures in the low 20s. Again, they're about our elevation, maybe a little bit higher, but it tends to cool off very quickly there, especially when you have some snow on the ground, as they do. Currently at our house here, we have about an inch of snow, but it's getting very patchy, and I think that's going to change very soon. So national radar, hope you can see this. What's going on? It's really tough out west because radar coverage tends to be uh, very incomplete. There tends to be large gaps between radar sites, so it's hard to see the true extent of precipitation, how much of an area it's covering. You can see that there's an impressive area of precipitation just making its way into southwestern Utah. Out in the plains, though, radar coverage is a little bit better. There's quite a bit of rain right now over Oklahoma, especially northeastern Oklahoma, pushing into eastern part of Kansas. In general, there's quite a bit of moisture from the Gulf of Mexico that is just streaming northward on south southerly winds all the way up across the plains, up into the Dakotas and Minnesota as well. And as I've talked about in previous webcasts, that's really important for us here in terms of precipitation in the winter. If you can get moisture off the Gulf of Mexico into eastern Colorado, Denver, Lyman, Fort Lupton, Fort Collins, into the foothills and the Front Range, you can get some significant precipitation. Satellite images, this is enhanced IR. Let me see if I can do a little bit of a loop here for you. So we'll do a 12-hour loop. And there you go. You can just barely make out some spin in the atmosphere right here as a deep trough has now entered the west coast from the Pacific Ocean. And it looks like it's centered somewhere between, the California-Nevada border right there, well south of Lake Tahoe and south of Mammoth as well, almost over towards Las Vegas. This is an impressive feature here, and it's a little harder to pick out in the later screen pictures. But, oops, if you look at this, let's do a pencil instead. A little bit of a S shape here. See that? And this enhancement up here, it's high clouds and some moisture and some precipitation of those clouds as well. But as this trough digs in to the west coast, the southerly winds ahead of it are pulling lots of moisture way up into Canada. I mean, this is like Southwest U.S. real estate up here. This moisture, it's just streaming this moisture up ahead of it, and that's a sign of a really strong storm. And this feature here, this S curve, this baroclinic leaf, is also a sign of a pretty intense upper level system. And this upper level system, we're expecting to move right at us over the next 24 to 36 hours. Now, last time we talked Friday night, things were looking very, very, very exciting for Denver area, northeastern Colorado. We were talking a couple feet of snow, could be a historic snowstorm. And the models have gone back and forth over the weekend. And you got to understand what the models do is the Weather Service feeds initialization information into them, including current observations, balloon information from their 12-hourly balloon soundings, aircraft observations, ship observations, and then the models, they're basically doing calculations and they're extending that out into the future. So the models are doing their best to replicate the atmosphere in a very analytical way. And that works really well, except there are times when the atmosphere is changing rapidly enough where the models really can't see that or resolve those changes very well. And that could be one of the cases that we'll be seeing over the next couple of days. The latest model runs are actually favoring a wetter solution now for northeastern Colorado, even the Front Range. And we'll take a look at that in just a moment. All right, so let's go to those models. All right. And before I do anything, let's just take a look at the total precipitation maps from the 0Z NAM, that's the most recent NAM, and the 0Z GFS, again, the one that was produced just a few hours ago with the latest and greatest data. We're looking at the NAM right now, and let's see if I can zoom in a little bit here so you can see this a little bit better. So I can see it a little bit better. There you go. That's a good start. Scroll down here. And we don't really have time to do a comparison between this and previous model runs, but suffice it to say that the past 2 or 3 model runs have been getting progressively wetter across northeastern Colorado. This is a really cool feature right here. I call this a little sucker hole right there. See that little dry spot there? It's interesting looking, isn't it? And we here in Nederland are roughly right about there. So we're a little bit outside that hole, but Boulder, Fort Collins, Greeley, they would be in that hole there. And you're like, okay, well, why is there a gap in the precipitation? And for a number of reasons. The models are showing a fairly strong storm forming over along the Colorado-Kansas border, and that would result in some northerly winds. There's a little geographic feature, not so little geographic feature, called the Cheyenne Ridge, right along the Wyoming-Colorado border. Northerly winds go up and over that ridge, and then they descend, downslope, warm, and that reduces precipitation. Also, as the storm begins to pull away, there will likely be a little bit of a northwesterly component in the winds as well, and then you're getting downsloped off the Continental Divide. So, point number one with this storm, orographics, local effects are going to make the forecast very, very tricky, especially along the foothills and along the Continental Divide, especially east of the Continental Divide, I should say. Initially, when the storm comes in, we're going to have southwesterly wind flow ahead of it. So we're looking at the favored areas such as the San Juans, picking up some decent precipitation amounts, and even up towards the Tavaputs, north of Grand Junction here, Powderhorn, Steamboat Springs. But then as the storm begins to close off and become a closed off low, it's going to become more of a front range type of storm. Winds aren't ideal though for the front range and the foothills right now. So it looks like the brunt of the heaviest precipitation would be over the northeastern plains, is what the NAM is showing right here. But look how close this heavy precipitation gets to Denver. I mean, Denver is right about in here. And it's right on the edge of the ½ inch to 3/4 inch to 1 inch contour. It's a very tight contour gradient in the precipitation. And it's been moving a little bit further west with each model run, and the precipitation is getting a little bit heavier with each run of the NAM. So we are talking about a lot of precipitation and a lot of wind for the northeast plains especially, and along the Continental Divide here, Winter Park, Berthoud Pass. Looking at plenty of snow. Winds will be a factor on the northeastern plains as well, whipping up that snow and reducing visibility along Highway 76, 70, and 81. It's going to be nasty tomorrow night into Tuesday. That said, let's take a look at the GFS. Now, the GFS was the model that was the outlier 2 days ago. It was showing a lot of snow across the Denver area in the Front Range and the foothills, and actually it's pulled into line now with the NAM, but it is definitely wetter. It's not seeing that little dry slot in there, and the NAM has a higher resolution. It's able to resolve the topography a little bit better. So I think the drier slot would still be there up towards Fort Collins, even though it's not really shown here on the GFS. But I mean, let's just switch back and forth between them real quick here and check that out. I mean, they're almost in agreement. In fact, if anything, the GFS may be a little bit further north with the heavy band of precipitation here and a little bit further west. And again, for your reference, it's always hard to do on these maps, but Nederland is right about here. That puts us well into the 1/4 inch to 1 inch liquid. 1 to 15 ratio, I'd expect the storm to be about a 1 to 15 inch ratio. If we got 1 inch of liquid, that'd be 15 inches of snow. 3/4 inch of an inch of liquid would be about 10 inches of snow. So we're looking at 10 to 15 inches of snow possible. What's the latest GFS forecast? All right, so what makes this forecast really tricky? It's not looking at the total precipitation maps. It's actually looking at the storm as it's developing in the mid to upper levels of the atmosphere. And we've talked a lot about this before, that especially out west, it's important to look at the winds through a deep layer of the atmosphere and how the storms are tracking. And I'm going to just start with 500 millibars. And let's just start with the initial 500 millibar map. This is a great level to look at to figure out how storms are moving and where they are, out west especially. And this is this evening around 0Z. Check this out. There's that trough that we were looking at on the radar and also on the satellite right there moving across Colorado, or southern mid to central California, excuse me. And if we just step forward in time a little bit, what happens in this storm evolution over the next 12 hours is going to be critical. This is going to be about midnight here. And see how it's digging. I mean, this is what we call a digging trough. It's becoming very well defined. The center of it's digging into almost down to Las Vegas and far southern Nevada. We'll skip ahead a little bit here. Internet connection's a little slow tonight. There we go. And we get to 12Z. And there you go. Look how far south that has dug. And the low is going to be right about here. Not making a lot of progress overnight. What's key now is when this storm actually cuts off and becomes a closed low. Because closed lows have a tendency to want to move westward. And so by midday tomorrow, it's cut off. It's become a closed low. And there it is right there. We'll just annotate that. There's your low. Okay, and remember the winds tend to circulate around this way, around lows in the northern hemisphere in general. Okay, do that. And this is really critical because once it cuts off, it's not going to progress to the east as quickly because there is a component of it now that wants to move westward or retrograde. So it slows it down nonetheless. It slows down its eastward progression. And this is going to be critical as we go ahead now in time. I'll actually go to tomorrow evening, say 0Z. And there it is right there. There is the low pressure system. It is currently centered, somewhere around Durango, Colorado. Plenty of moisture to work with here. And by midnight tomorrow night, that low is now actually deepening rapidly over southeastern Colorado. The upper low is the key with this system, and this is what the models have been struggling to resolve over the past several days now, is where this low is going to end up being and where it's going to end up intensifying. Now, the latest round of the GFS has it actually starting to intensify while it's still in southeast Colorado. And once it starts to intensify, notice that its eastward progress is going to be slowed down quite a bit. And so by the time we get into Tuesday morning, the center of that low is over the Colorado-Kansas border right in there. So it's greatly slowed down, it's deepening, and there is just a huge amount of circulation around it. It's a closed low. Generally in the front range, we would be getting winds from the, at least in the upper levels of the atmosphere, from the north-northeast. Not completely favorable for a heavy snowfall along the front range or the foothills, but it still has a component of lift to it. So I would expect to be seeing snow at least into Tuesday morning along the mountains. But then as this storm system just stalls basically over western Kansas, at least for Tuesday morning, and you see it's not moving there at all. There it is. It is just sitting there nearly stationary over, at this point, by midday Tuesday, it's over far western Kansas, but it's moving slow. And what we tend to look for with these lows is a trend. If it starts slowing down even more, that means that northeast Colorado and the front range foothills will be under the snow gun, so to speak, for several hours more. And so you have upslope winds, or at least winds with an upslope component, and you'll be getting bands of heavy snow into northeastern Colorado. So let's take a look now at the surface map associated with that. And we'll actually start off tomorrow evening, because that's when things really start to get interesting around here. And we're looking at the what we call the sea level pressure map and the 1,500 thickness map. Here we go. And of course, the internet connection is really slow. Probably lots of people looking at these models tonight, hoping for a snow day. And this is tomorrow evening. Nothing too surprising here. You got an area of low pressure forming over far eastern Colorado, right on the border there. Plenty of moisture here, right in there. Northeasterly winds around that low. And again, the thickness lines they do correspond to temperature. So the higher the thickness, generally the higher the temperature. Not always at the surface, but just as a general rule, this gives you an idea where the cold air masses are. These lower, colder blue thickness lines with lower numbers on them, and these warmer thickness lines with bigger numbers on them. And there's that area of low pressure right there. And we'll see how that evolves. It doesn't really move much tomorrow night. There it is. It's just deepening. And as it deepens, we get quite a bit of precipitation back into the front range and the foothills in the Denver area. Big question is when will it cool off for it to be all snow in Denver and on the plains? And that's always a tricky part of these forecasts. This is tomorrow about midnight. Again, that low is just sitting there stationary, pumping moisture back into northeastern Colorado and the front range foothills in Denver. And it looks like tomorrow afternoon, when the precipitation first starts in the plains and the foothills, it'll be mainly of a showery nature, but then it'll intensify and become more widespread. By tomorrow night, it's going to be generally snow everywhere. And you can see the atmosphere has cooled off, the thickness lines have lowered. Storm is sitting right there in one place, and that's pretty amazing, with heavy snowfall all the way back into the foothills. And then by 12Z, the storm starts to become stacked. And what do I mean by stacked? Basically, it means that the upper level low, if you remember from the previous slides I was showing you is right about in the same position. So the surface low is under the upper level low, and they're stacked, and that's why it's moving so slow at that point. It's just vertically stacked. And there you go again. We're looking at snowfall rates in some places down here, a little bit south of Denver, an inch an hour, maybe 2 inches an hour. Generally across northeastern Colorado, anywhere from a half to an inch an hour. And look at these tight pressure gradients. That indicates strong winds. You can just picture the winds blowing around that area of low pressure. And winds blow counterclockwise around lows in the northern hemisphere. And these black lines are pressure lines, or isobars. And the tighter that isobar packing is, the stronger the winds. So you have the wind, you have the snow, you're going to have difficult travel conditions on Tuesday morning, probably through at least midday Tuesday. See what happens with the storm now. We're going to go into midday Tuesday. And what should happen now is the storm will start to move. It'll start to weaken, as you can see. And the precipitation is just beginning to pull out of our neck of the woods up here in Nederland. Still continuing on the plains, though, but lightening up. And then by 18Z, I say 18Z, that's about lunchtime on Tuesday. Yeah, you have that wraparound moisture there. The storm barely moves during the whole period. That's really impressive, but it is weakening because it's now vertically stacked. It's not intensifying anymore. And some places, especially further out on the northeastern plains, Fort Lupton, Sterling, precipitation will likely continue all day long on Tuesday. So you can see where, as we've talked about in other webcasts, the key to heavy precipitation events in general, rain or snow, here in Colorado and elsewhere is a slow-moving storm system. And this is a very slow-moving storm system. If you remember, this is Tuesday evening. Well, Monday evening, that storm was just here, right in that area on the border there. So it's barely moved at all for 24 hours. And that's where you can get your most significant precipitation events. Now, the position of the storm is still a little bit too far east to be a truly historic snowfall for the Front Range, but it has slowed down a little bit, and we still have 24 to 36 hours to go before this verifies. So things could definitely still change. It could speed up, it could slow down a little bit. One thing to think about, and an observation I've made over the past 5 years that we've lived here, is there are several mountain ranges between us and the Pacific Ocean. The Sierra Nevada, you have the Wasatch here in Utah, and of course then you have the Rockies, and you have several chains within the Rockies, the San Juans, the Elk. And these storm systems, as they come across these closed lows, as they come across this terrain, sometimes seem to get a little bit hung up over the mountains. Could be my imagination, but there seems to be a tendency for models to be a little bit too quick with these upper level lows, getting them across the mountains here in the southwest. Think about it, some of these peaks go up to 14,000 feet, especially in the Sierra Nevada and the Rockies here. And the steering winds for some of these storms, the 500 millibar, and is about 16 to 19,000 feet above us, so there's a little bit of resistance, and the cold air gets hung up in the mountains, and that does make a difference. And some models resolve that better than others, but it's a really complicated problem. So my feeling right now is that the storm system will probably slow down a little bit more. And it's not just me being hopeful for more precipitation, and I'm thinking that it's going to be a fairly substantial storm for the plains, northeastern Colorado, perhaps back into Denver, and even up here in Nederland. I think we're going to do pretty well. So let's take a look at some of these forecasts now that we've had a chance to look at the models. I think a good place to go would be the National Weather Service. They had a decent snowfall map that I'll show you right now, which didn't really take into account this latest trend in the models. The zero-Z models would be a little bit moister. So we'll go here, go to the Denver Boulder forecast area right there. And they have a nice slide presentation they put together this afternoon. which was showing the latest information they had at that time, which I think was pretty good at that time. I think models have trended wetter, and I think these totals you're about to see a little bit low, but it could be wishful thinking. And there we go. And so they actually do a nice job of showing where the storm's moving. And it's a fairly progressive storm system. And this was just issued recently. Wow. And there you go. Here's the totals. Oops. All right. So this is the dry spot that we were talking about, the dry slot, the sucker hole, as we like to call it, up towards Fort Collins and Greeley. Stretches all the way down towards Boulder again. Some downsloping winds possible. Well, what's interesting is right here in Nederland, we're right on the cusp of the 6 to 8 to 8 to 12 inch range. And I think with the latest trend in the models, it might actually be a little bit higher than that, even up in this area. Again, we'll see if it's wishful thinking. It doesn't look like they really updated this map. This is still 5 p.m. Mountain Standard Time, even though the presentation is for a little bit more recently. They've updated this piece anyway to show you where the storm is positioning. And again, just showing it's a fairly slow-moving system, and it's slowing down, which is good for significant precipitation. So we'll see what happens. And trying to think, one last thing I'd like to show you is the moss. A little bit of discrepancy in the moss. This is showing probability of precipitation. This is Denver. It's only 60% chance of precipitation tomorrow, 92% tomorrow night, 73% on Tuesday. The NAM is a little bit drier, as we saw. 27% chance of precip tomorrow, 62% chance tomorrow night, 32%. Puts out 4 to 6 inches of snow for Denver. This is statistics now. And then the GFS puts out 8 or more inches of snow for Denver tomorrow and tomorrow night. Moss takes the raw model data and applies statistics to it, saying basically, given the past 10 storms that were sort of like this, how does this storm compare to those storms? And it produces a forecast that way. It attempts to add value to the numbers coming out of the model. Remember, the models are just running calculations. This is adding some uncertainty. It's adding some probability to that. It's comparing it to analogous cases, and it's coming up with a forecast. How useful is it? It can be very useful. Out here out west, it sometimes seems very hit and miss, but I thought it was worth looking at. So bottom line, snow starting here in Nederland tomorrow afternoon, becoming heavy at least for a period of time tomorrow night, I think. And then tapering off Tuesday morning. I'm going to stick my neck out there and say we're going to get between 8 inches and a foot of snow here. And we could get more if the storm slows down a little bit. Could be a significant storm, though, in the eastern plains, maybe stretching back into Denver as well. So if you like skiing, skiers are going to do great with this storm. Not a huge storm, perhaps, but 1 to 2 feet of snow are forecast over Berthoud Pass. Mary Jane, Winter Park should be seeing some decent snow amounts as well as A Basin and Loveland. So that's it for now. We'll see if I have an update tomorrow night. Thank you for joining me. This is Brian, signing off.